Hi, I'm Ali Words, and this is Last Unrifled Yaw. Last Unrifled Yaw is a podcast where we have conversations about video art, experimental music, avant-garde literature, performance art, and the occult. If you or someone you know would like to be on Last Unrifled Yaw, please get in touch. Justknecht designs and writes about glassed bead games inspired by the book of the same name by Herman Hesse. We also discuss the relationship between glass bead games and ritual, as well as divination and enochian chess. Hey everyone, I'm Ali Words, and today we have Justknecht. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Justknecht?
Yeah, sure. Hi. So I'm a glass bead game player and designer, and I've made and played real versions of the fictional glass bead game in Herman Hesse's Nobel Prize-winning novel, which is a game of ideas that puts into play the total contents and values of culture, actually. So when you're playing, you become an alchemist of ideas. It's transformation of everyday life. It's transforming nature. Find what you wish. You've read the Glass Bead game, right?
I have, yeah.
You like it?
Yeah, I love it. I actually don't read that much fiction anymore these days, but the glass bead game is interesting in that it's simultaneously a work of fiction, but it also presents like a conceptual tool.
Yeah. I mean, if you look up at the Glass Bead game on the internet, it often presents it as a social novel actually, and the game itself isn't really at the forefront of it. But for me, when I read it a long time ago, I read it and it really hooked me. It was the idea of the game actually that really compelled me. Yeah, so that's kind of where a lot of my thinking around the glass bead game is trying to work towards the game as it's in the book. But actually, the book itself, I've read it a few times a long time ago. I'm not sure I could sit and read the book again now. But my version of the book has got lots of little stickies where the game is actually talked about. So these are the bits that I go back to anyway.
So, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you approach the glass speed game, how you try to implement variations on it.
Yeah, no, okay. I mean, so I've made quite a few versions of the game. Like I say, I read it when I was a teenager, which is, I don't know, 30 years ago or something like that, more. So over a course of time, I've tried it in different ways actually. So I've made pen and paper versions. There's one version called Rattlesnake, which you just play with some marks on paper, and it's just really a kind of a thought game that you can play. And then also there was some books that I wrote a while ago about a version of the game which I now found a bit complicated actually, so I don't really recommend those. And more recently, I've got a pack of cards actually, which is meant to help you to find ideas that are good to play with in a game. That you can kind of that you can explore nicely with either on your own or with a group of people. So the idea of the game. Perhaps it's just worth explaining a little bit about what it is. Then, so in all of the versions of the game that I'm working on now, it's about taking an idea. It can be any idea actually, and then putting it into different contexts and seeing what happens to that idea when you think about it in different ways. So it's a particular theme that you pick, and then if you're playing with somebody else, you take it in turns to kind of pick themes, and also you take it in turns to match the theme against some of the contexts that have been put into play. So this is, if you're playing it on pen and paper, it's just a simple matter of, you have a theme and then you work through these different contexts. Using the pack of cards version, it just helps you to find themes that are good. It helps you to find context so that you can have some variety. It drives you into different areas that are around not just knowledge based, but also uncertainty and spiritual based things. And, so having a pack of cards to drive the context that you're picking Make sure that the game goes over different areas. It kind of, it doesn't get too narrow.
Yeah. For the listeners, could you give a concrete example of like a theme or maybe some like moves that you could make just to demonstrate like what kinds of ideas and how they relate to each other?
Do you want to play a game? Do you want to
Sure.
play a quick game?
Yeah, let's play one.
This might be the best way to illustrate. We'll start one off anyway, and
Yeah.
we'll see how it goes. Okay. So one example that I think is quite easy to start with, which might be a good one to try, is to pick an apple. Yeah. So it's
Okay.
an apple, right? Now I'll start, and I'm going to start by picking two themes. All right. So we've got an apple, and I'm going to say, okay, two contexts, and the context then are going to be science and music. Okay.
Okay.
So now you have to think, how are you going to relate this idea of an apple to either science or music? Do you want to have a go at that?
So we could relate it to music. My brain immediately went to Apple computers, and then there's like
Okay.
this the sounds that they make at the beginning on the early Apple computers supposedly were meant to remind one of like the Garden of Eden and the forbidden fruit. But now I realize
Okay.
I'm
Now you're
like,
bringing all kinds of stuff into
yeah, that's what
but
my
okay,
brain
you've done
did.
it. You've made the link. Okay, so you've made a link of an apple to music then, and the sounds. Yeah. So now you pick another context. So having made that link, you pick another context, which might be what?
I guess mythology. I kind of went there a little bit.
Mythology. Okay, right. So now it's my turn, and I've got to link the idea of an apple to either science or to mythology. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to go with mythology, and I'm going to go with this idea of. Do you remember this race in mythology where the apple was dropped and somebody kept stopping and trying to pick it up? I think it was Atalanta, was it?
Yeah.
Had to keep stopping to pick up an apple. So that's my link then. All right. So we've got two links so far, and I add another one, and I'm going to say religion. Okay, so now it's your turn. You have to link the idea of an apple to science or religion. Exactly.
Okay. Um. So I was trying to think of one for science, and I don't know. I don't know how strict you have to be in these games. That this is actually the main issue I had when trying to play them when I first tried to design one.
Yeah, I always say if it's fun, it's allowed. So
Okay.
I don't think you have to be strict.
So I was thinking about how I think apples are dicots. Like when you cut them in half, you see the five. Or maybe they're
Yeah,
monocots. They're either dicots or monocots. One of the two. But
yeah,
you
no, I
can
like
see
that.
the
Okay,
five seeds. It makes like a little pentagram, sort of.
yeah, yeah, no, I like that. Good, done. So you've made a
Okay.
link there.
I think we
So
got the idea.
yeah, okay. So and so it continues. Yeah.
How do you win, or is it just like jamming?
Well, do you know, I get this question a lot actually. It hasn't actually got any winning conditions. You know, the idea is meant to be to explore the idea between you. Yeah.
It's fun. Yeah.
And you're having some fun, you're finding something out about the other person and what they're interested in and so on. Um, the in the past I have come up with versions of it that you can win, and some people really, if you talk to gamers, some people are really against having a game that hasn't got winning conditions. Particularly, I don't know, chess players and so on. They're like, no, you have to have winning conditions. But I'm like, no, it doesn't. But they're there. One way of winning that I thought was quite fun that I came up with, but I don't use it often, is I don't know if you have this game Pointless. Do you have this TV game Pointless in America?
No. What is that?
No. So we have one over here, and it's basically you have to answer a question with an answer that a whole group of people haven't already come up with themselves. So this gave me the idea of actually, if I can guess and write down in advance how you will respond, for example, how you will link an apple to music, for example, then I've won. Yeah. Or if I can guess how you will link an apple to religion, then I've won.
So you have to guess how the other person would do it.
Yeah. If
Okay,
I can guess in advance how you will make that link, then the game is mine, if you like.
that's
And
cool.
that yeah, it's nice, and it also means that you have to be a bit creative and not do something that's too obvious, or you have to kind of stretch yourself to think of something that might be surprising to the other person. But so that's a possibility. That's one way of winning. The basic mechanic, though, is getting a theme and varying it across these different contexts. So and anything else about winning conditions and so on is details really.
I gotcha. Yeah, that's cool. It's like a musical improvisation. No one wins when you're just playing together, right?
Yeah, no, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So I think a lot about improvisation. That there's a definite link there. That there's a link with responding to the other person as well. So it's nice when a game takes into account the previous moves. So either you can just come up with something that's, I don't know, just popped into your head, or you can think about the way that the game has been going so far, as you would do in improvisation. You'd be listening to the other players, you'd be trying to kind of riff on some of the things that they'd done as well. So I like that. I like that kind of analogy. Yeah.
Cool. Well, what was it that originally made you want to dedicate so much time to designing glass bead games?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I say, so I mean, I read it as a teenager, and I was completely captivated by it. Um, so in the book, there isn't enough detail to actually play it. So if you go to the book, you can find some examples of some of the moves that are given at quite high level. It tells you the story of how the game's developed as well. It tells you that what some of the people who are supposed to have developed the game were interested in. They were mathematicians, they were musicians, they were linguists. So there's enough kind of to get started if you want to kind of have a go, have a go at making the name game. And since then, I've just always wanted this game to kind of exist. I've always wanted it to be something that was there and you could actually play it. I mean, does that answer your question? There's probably longer versions I could give you of the
Yeah,
answer.
I guess that answers my question, which was what originally made you want to. But
Yeah,
what about it has kept you at it for so long?
it's not been easy. I think that's what's kept me at it because I like I say, I've been working at it for a long time. I've tried lots of different ways, and it's been a very gradual process. So as a result of knowing, I was so into it, right? I was so into it when I first read this, and I was totally kind of wanting to have a go. So even when I was deciding what I was going to do at university, I was looking for places that I could study maths and music. So I'm a musician as well. I'm not particularly a mathematician, but I went to college and I studied maths and music, and I did a dissertation about all the ancient Greeks and all this kind of stuff, with a view to kind of building the knowledge and the background to be able to try and move forward with this. But it didn't. It didn't help me. It was very interesting, and it was interesting to me anyway. And I learned a lot, but it didn't actually help me to get started on the game. So then I don't know. I mean, in when I was in my 20s, I so this was like, I don't know. The internet was just probably about getting going. It was like the mid 90s or something like this, and there was a Usenet group that was run by Charles Cameron, the late, greatly missed Charles Cameron. So he designed Class B game versions himself. He'd had some success with them as educational tools. He was very encouraging to other people as well who wanted to play the games and wanted to design their own as well. So I got a few kind of trial versions and games out at the time. They didn't amount to much actually, but I don't know. At least I've made a start, if you like. 10 years later, I was closer to a playable game. I had some example games which I wrote about in these 3 short books, which, like I say, I don't really support the approach anymore. But nevertheless, it was a kind of a milestone. I put them on record, but they were too complicated. So I had, I think probably the biggest breakthrough was, I don't know, 2015, something like this, and I was literally I'd got into actually reading about beads. So I was reading a book about the worldwide history of beads, and I was yeah, and actually I don't know why it took me so long to get to that point. So I mean, thinking if you were going to design a glass bead game, you'd think you'd read about beads, you'd think you'd read about games, but actually somehow I didn't, but so so I have now, so I got into kind of board game geek. I started reading about beads and so on. So anyway, so I was trying to compare a picture of some glass beads to some agate beads that they were supposed to be imitating, and separating out the form or the appearance of the bead from its meaning. Okay. So anyway, the application of this in a game is to allow you to take an idea, like we just did, and to develop it across different contexts. Yeah. So either you hold the idea constant, so it might be thinking about the idea of the Roman god Mercury, and then translating that into the Greek Hermes or the Egyptian Thoth or the Norse Odin. Or else you hold the name constant. So Mercury becomes the metal Mercury in chemistry, or the planet Mercury in astronomy, or the car or phone company that's called Mercury as well, which are probably chosen because the name is associated with speed and communication. Mercury, the chemical, being the liquid quicksilver, planet being, the fastest moving around the sun, and so on. So it's this idea of this is where the kind of the core of the game then came from for me. Is taking this idea, either varying the way the word that you're using for it, and what would Mercury be in Egypt or Greek mythology and so on, or taking the word and saying, what different ways can I interpret this? So this is kind of crucial. And this led to the most recent version of the game, which does exactly this. It takes this idea or a name and it varies it by putting into different contexts. And really, very unexpected and interesting things can happen when you take something and you put it into a context where you wouldn't normally find it. Sometimes you wouldn't even usually think about it in that context. And that can really, it gives you creative ideas when you put something into an unexpected context and you say, well, okay, how does this link here? Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that last part. That's probably why I got the most interested in glass bead games as a tool for transforming your perception of the world. Uh, and that's
Wow.
also a lot of why I'm into the occult, is I feel they do, if you actually study an occult system of correspondences, you are kind of studying someone's old glass bead game so that you could perceive the world through the framework that has been created.
You really you put your finger on it completely there. This is what I hope the game will do. I hope it is a way to look at the world through different lenses, if you like, and it can turn even the mundane into something extraordinary. This is why in the initial description that I was using, I was saying it makes us into alchemists. It makes us into people that can change an idea really into anything, put it into different context, and you see it in a different way. I really like that.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. So when you are designing these glass bead games, what is your process like while you're figuring out how to iterate a new version that hopefully does a specific thing better?
Mm. So it's interesting that you asked, yeah, because there's designing the games themselves, and then there is the playing the game. So you're asking me about actually designing the game.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
also design games, so I'm always
Ah.
curious to hear from game designers. And when I
Uh-huh.
say I design games, I don't really mean video games. I mean like card games or board games, miniature games.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, one thing I would say is I designed them slowly and incrementally. Yeah. So almost you might say serendipitously as well. So I've got the idea that Hesse put in his book is like something that you can work towards, but it doesn't help you at all. The book itself doesn't help you with the journey on the ground. So you've really got to find your own way. This is what I found, and it's been trial and error. Yeah. So I would say my process is very much incremental, slow to the point of being glacial, almost. I think. But over time, I hope that I've kind of got somewhere with it. I tell you, another thing that I like to do is I like to go back to sources as well. So when I have an idea, for example, I explained this idea before about taking an idea and varying either the expression for it or the interpretation of it. So if I have an idea like that I want to build into the game, I go and look for other examples of that. So who else has done this? Who else has thought about this? And that really helps me then to kind of build around the idea.
Yeah, I do the same thing. A lot of my books have like an inspiration sources section, which is just like a list of books that I found by making
Right,
sure no one else had done the same thing already.
right. Although actually, I quite like it when I find that somebody has done the same thing, because it kind of, it's not that it's validating it, but it just shows you that you're not completely left field and doing something wrong. So usually you find that what you've done has got your own, you've put your own spin on it. But it is reassuring actually to go back and find that actually you're not the first person to have come up with this, and that actually there's a pedigree, and it gives you some ability then to kind of challenge really what you're trying to do then, and build on it further.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Because like it's difficult to do something that's totally new. But when I say that it hasn't been done before, is that I don't know if this has happened to you, but it's been the case where I've had an idea. I think, oh, this will make a great book or video or song or something. And I go looking for it. And I find someone has done almost the exact same thing. And
Mm,
that can be validating, especially if the person is like well respected or well known or something. You're like, great minds think alike, whatever, right?
mm.
But then I guess, like you said, it gives you a foundation to build upon. How can I express what I was trying to express, but add something different or more, or just I don't want to put out something that is the exact same as someone else has done.
Yeah, no, yeah, right, yes, I agree. Um, but yeah, okay. Is it ever the same though? Is because usually when you think of something and you go hunting for precedents, if you like, you find there are differences, and you've got your own reason for doing it as well, and you've got your own context that you're working in that's made you produce a game or a song or something like that you're saying, which makes it different, right?
Yeah, I so at heart, I am I'm really into things that are maximalist in aesthetic and are always striving for something new, like early modernism in the arts and literature. And for me, it's okay to combine lots of different elements, but if I put through the effort to make something worth releasing, I kind of want it to be strikingly different. I want it to at least feel novel, even if you can find little bits from all over the place that show up in what I've done.
Yeah, it has to be at the end of the day. It has to be something that you feel as though you've personally, I don't know, added something, isn't it? Yeah, maybe this
Yeah.
is it. It's your take on it. It's your personal take on something, even though that thought or that idea might have been around. You've got a unique point of view on that, right?
Yeah. And I do think every once in a while people have ideas that haven't been done before. Like the Glass Speed game. Are you aware of anyone before Hesse that did something that was basically a Glass Speed game? Knowingly?
Well, there's different answers to that. So the as he writes about it in the book, it's something new. Yeah. However, it has got a pedigree. And he even talks about, actually, if you look in the introductory section of the book, he even talks about the process, that the people that supposedly fictionally invented the game, went through. And he talks about even things like the Happy Families game, the card game Happy Families. And there was a version of that was around in Germany that was a bit more kind of arts and literature orientated, so it had, I don't know, Goethe, and then it had, the various different things that Goethe had done, and it might have had some musicians and artists and so on. And so, so the idea of having a game that you're playing with ideas, and the idea of then having different examples of that, because within your Happy Families you might have artists, musicians, and playwrights and all this kind of thing that you can make connections across. So it was there as a game. Even in Hesse's version of the history of the glass bead game, it had a pedigree. And he also explains, he goes into the ideas of just linking, for example, linking mathematics and music, which is one of the things that really kind of gripped me initially, and that goes back, thousands of years, and that's what the game was built on. The idea of this correspondence between two fields, which at first glance you might think are very different, but actually are very much interrelated. And he talks about the early people that were involved in the glass bead game were. He talks about fictional characters, but they're people like Bernoulli, who was a mathematician that was very interested in the links between maths and music, for example. And there were people like Leibniz as well, which is another person that wrote about maths and music. So he wasn't trying to present something as completely new. He was trying to present something that had a history and had come from somewhere, but then he kind of took it and he presented it in his own unique way.
Yeah, I guess that is kind of what we just said a minute ago.
Yeah.
And my brain always goes, there has to have been a first person.
Yeah.
I don't know. Even if you can't find them, to me, like who came up with the idea of playing games with ideas? Maybe it's even pre-linguistic, or maybe pre-written language.
You'd
Probably
think
means
so, wouldn't
speech.
you? You'd think so. I mean, you can take this thing we were just talking about, maths and music. You can take that all the way back to the earliest written stuff that you can find. They've got it in Sumerian. They can find manuscripts that are about this, and so it must go back before that. If that was the first time it was written down, then maybe that we've still got it, but it must surely go back before that, just to when people were trying to figure out how things work, isn't it? And how does music work? How does astronomy work? People must have been going through the thought process, and it must have been part of the verbal culture before it was written down.
Hmm.
But for sure, these things develop. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't think about it in the same way now that they were thinking about it 3,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. But nevertheless, the core of the idea goes through. It's like one of my games, isn't it? It's like the core of the idea is there, but it comes through all of these different ages and cultures, and it takes its own form. And we've got our own way of thinking about it now. I'm sure I think about things differently from you do in maths and music and so on as well. I'm sure you've got some interesting insights on that if you're interested in music as well, which I think you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I am. I do develop unusual compositional systems, I guess you could say.
Right.
And I don't think I've developed one that is entirely without precedent.
Can you give me an example?
So I have this constructed language I designed
Yeah.
that it's logosyllabic, kind of like Mayan or ancient Egyptian or
All right.
Chinese.
Yeah.
And each possible syllable has a musical phrase that goes with it, usually between 4 and 9 notes.
Okay.
So you can speak the language musically. And there aren't that many people who have made a language that you can actually write out via composition. I think Messiaen did something like that. But a lot of the times, if you go back and look for people who designed something like a musical language. It's much more common that they developed a cipher where you can like convert each of the letters in the English alphabet into a note, and then
Right.
it's just a cipher for an existing language rather than the language being intrinsically having a musical orthography.
Mm. I mean, there's a lot of people that have experimented with scores, musical scores, aren't there? Yeah, particularly I think in the 20th century classical music, you might say, sphere. There's a lot of artists as well that have kind of built in music into their art. So the idea of the visual, I mean, so it's like, it's like anything else, isn't it? That's written down. There's now a standard form for writing. You might say Western art music. We've got a particular way of writing it, but people play with that. People play around with that a lot. I think if you've taken something and taken it to something that's an ideogram, I think that's very interesting. Actually, yeah.
Yeah, it is properly ideographic, not simply logographic. But yeah, like you're saying, lots of people have played around with scores in different ways. Like I always like, are they called action scores? Where it looks like sheet music, but often people draw like pictures onto the sheet music, and you don't play it the same way twice. The pictures just govern how you move your body.
Yeah, right, okay. Moving your body. So this is almost like notating the dance as well, isn't it?
A little bit, yeah. And dance notation is
Which is another
notoriously
thing. Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah. I guess it all links. The musician at the end of the day is a body, performing. So instead of notating the notes that they produce, you could just notate actually the movements that they could make. It's another interesting approach, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. If you don't need the music, if all you care about is like the rhythm and the expression, like the volume, how loud a different
Mm,
thing is, or timing, that kind of stuff, or
mm,
whether something's high or low or medium in terms of pitch.
mm. It reminds me a bit of, I mean, when you're talking about experimental music, I mean, John Cage, of course, was
Hmm.
was the kind of the go-to experimental musician in 20th century, and he had, I mean, he had scores that would just like direct the performer to, feed a bale of hay to the piano or something like that. So,
Yeah, John Cage actually did the closest thing to the musical language I was just talking about, where he took the Book of Changes
yeah, okay.
and he developed a system that turned each of the hexagrams into a little bit of musical notation. I don't remember exactly how he divided it up. It was kind of complicated,
Mm,
and it mathematically produced sheet music based on the Book of Changes, like
ah,
I Ching.
very nice. He had this other thing where he drew around objects, stones, I think sometimes, or even like, I don't know, a pair of scissors on a score, and depending on how his sketch kind of interacted with the score, that this would be where the notes were. So he was like literally translating objects into music. He's a very fascinating guy, actually. And
Yeah.
actually, he was a big influence on this Fluxus
Hmm.
art movement as well, which I'm very much into. And actually, my latest version of the Variations game is called the Fluxus Variations because it's very much influenced by that.
Could you describe what Fluxus is and your relationship with it?
Yeah, I mean, so Fluxus was this art movement that was inspired, I'm going to say, by Cage actually, but he came before. Fluxus really was a group of people that came together in the '60s. And one of their kind of key tenets, which touches on something that we were talking about before, is that everybody is an artist. So this idea that you can put the tools in everybody's hands to enable them to create, and I love that idea. And this is one of the things that's kind of behind what I'm trying to do with the game now. The Fluxus Variations card game uses themes from the Fluxus movement. So it's things like improvisation, things like the unfinished work, because there's this idea about the work goes on, it continues. Ideas like randomness, which we were just talking about. So these kinds of ideas, which are kind of seminal ideas for Fluxus, become the themes that you can use in the game. And then you take, just in the same way that we did before, you can take one of these themes and you explore it. So you can say, okay, randomness. How does randomness come across in dance? How does it come across in music? How does it come across in art? How does it come across in religion? How does it come across in joy? How does it come across in anger and pain? So that's how I've used it. That's how I've used the ideas that come out of Fluxus to feed into the same structure that I have used for the other games that I've done as well, which takes an idea, develops it across different contexts. I mean, I'm not sure. I'd like to say yes, I'm a Fluxus artist. I think that it's not by self-nomination though that you do these things, But I feel close to it. I feel close to the Fluxus for what they were trying to do, and the particular idea about helping, trying to facilitate creation in the game. So giving somebody a game that can help them to create, that can help to produce Fluxus poetry. Actually, is one thing that I've talked about in the past. So the output of the game is an idea that goes across different contexts. But you can capture that. You can capture that in an essay, as I do, and as in poetry and so on. And so it's the act of playing, though. It's not the kind of concrete output. It's the fact that you've taken an idea and you've had this kind of poetic way of thinking about it going through different contexts. Yeah, and I feel and I hope that comes across as something that's aligned with what the Fluxus movement was trying to do.
I think so, yeah. It kind of brings me back to one of the previous questions, which I'm realizing you had maybe interpreted in a different way than me. How do you design your work process? When I asked that the first time, I asked in terms of designing the games, but it sounded like maybe you had thought about it in a different way.
How do you mean?
Oh, okay. I just misinterpreted your response then.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So
I almost thought that maybe you meant in terms of when you're playing or writing about glass bead games.
yeah, no, okay. I mean, so this is playing the game now. So I talked about actually designing, the game as a process, the process of designing the game. So now I guess I'm talking about playing the game itself. Yeah. So given that we've got the game and we've designed it, then we play it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that itself is a process, isn't it? And it's that process which I hope that helps people to have fun, I guess, with ideas and helps to kind of explore ideas across different contexts. Helps to see things in different ways, transform an idea, brainstorm.
So when you're playing a glass bead game, though, how do you think of what moves to play?
So there's different kinds of games. There's the type of game that we just played, which is kind of quick fire. Yeah. And you can play that exactly as we just played it now, just kind of ideas off the top of your head. And you can't be very strict then, So I think that if you're going to play it like that, you've got to have some kind of leeway about, like I say, if it's fun, then it's okay. There's another kind of game that you can play that takes a while. So this is like kind of playing chess with somebody, over not a kind of a 15-minute game, but over perhaps an afternoon, or even kind of exchanging moves by email over a number of weeks or something like this. So there's this kind of game as well, where it can involve actually you go and research it, so you can say, well, actually, I this idea of randomness. So how does randomness play out in religion? I don't know. If that came up in a game that we were playing quickfire, I'd struggle with it. But I can go away with that, and I can think about it. I can research it, and hopefully come up with something. I'll learn something for a start, because I don't have a quick answer for it. But I would hopefully come up with something that would be interesting in the game, and to the person that I was playing with, or the people that I was playing with as well. So it depends on the game you're playing. There's another kind of game as well, actually, which comes on to something that I wanted to talk to you about, actually, which is the ritual game, if you like.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, and this is one that it comes out of the book. It comes out of the Glass Bead game book. So they learn how to play the games, and they learn how to make their moves and all this kind of thing. But then they have, I think it's annual. They talk about it in the book. There's like a ritual game that is planned in advance. So it's like authored by I think one of the players, actually. When I think about how it's presented in the book, it's the kind of hero of the book, such as he is Justknecht. This is the Magister Ludi. He's like the game master at the time, and he talks about how he designed the game that then was played in a kind of a ritual format. So the ideas about we were talking about before, about improvising and all that kind of thing. I mean, it's an interesting juxtaposition, I think, because the ritual. I mean, actually, this is kind of where I wanted to go with the question to you. Actually, was how if you planned a game like that. So if either one or two different players planned in advance the different moves that they were going to make, and then kind of performed that game as a ritual, how would you keep the kind of game aspect of it? And do you get my question?
Yeah. So
it's about how do you take something. How do you take something that you've planned in advance and still make it kind of fresh and make it a worthwhile ritual?
yeah, it kind of, to me, sounds, my brain had multiple responses. But in general, I think it sounds like a musical performance, especially classical music. People play the same piece hundreds of times. It doesn't even have to be classical music, but they'll play it hundreds of times, hopefully for some genres the exact same way every time. But when you are performing it for others, you want to play it with just the right intonation and tempo shifts such that it brings out the maximal quantity of emotion and appropriate types of emotion. So that's a bit harder with a glass bead game as they're presented in the book, because there's not as much drama. Like they have a bead with a symbol on it, and they like place it on a board, and then they meditate.
They meditate, yeah, exactly, yeah.
So the meditating is, if you don't care about an audience, I think meditating is probably the way to do it. But if you do have an audience, I would almost suggest that you have some sort of additional performance that dramatizes both the move you just made, and then if you're playing the version that I remember in the book where there's like, you have to use the same type of analogy as the previous move, you could try to have imagery, be that like paintings or video or dance, that depict that the idea of the movie just played in its analogy at the same time as the previous move and its analogy, so that you see them side by side. I would try to turn it into an art film, I guess, is what I would do.
Yeah, no, that's nice. I mean, I think the only visual aid that they have in the book is the ideogram, isn't it? Because they have like this language that they use to play the game, and I think it comes up on a big screen, or somehow it's magnified. They magnify the actual ideogram that they've used to represent the move. But then I think even the audience is meant to kind of just meditate. Actually, it's like, well, great move, and then they just think about it, and
Do you know
yeah.
about enochian chess?
I've heard about it actually, and it's something that was talked about on. I mentioned this Usenet group, the Charles Cameron one. There were people that were talking about enochian chess. There, it's where you play the chess, and it's got kind of. I don't know if it's esoteric or I don't know. It's got other meanings anyway, depending on what you're doing with the pieces, right?
Yeah, it is. It is esoteric. You could just play it as a game, but what it is it has this enochian tablet where it's a grid, and then each square has a bunch of different magical symbols associated with it,
Yeah.
like tarot, astrology, alchemy, geomancy, and then the enochian letter that goes with that
Okay.
square on the grid. And then each of the pieces represent an Egyptian god. And the
Yeah.
Egyptian gods have their own correspondences based on Golden Dawn stuff. And the
Yeah.
idea is that after each move, you contemplate it. So, like, if you move Osiris from a square of fire to a square of earth, you would contemplate, what does it mean? What is the idea of Osiris and all of its associations in the context of fire, however you want to interpret fire? And then that god form, Osiris, transforming uh, from fire to earth. How does that apply to the theme or the general question of the game? Because like a tarot reading, you have a question or
Yeah.
something you want to contemplate,
Yeah.
and
I like
people
that.
often they meditate for a while after each move, kind of like in the glass bead game in the book.
Yeah. Okay. I've never seen it played. I've never played it, but I can see the connection there. Yeah. Have you played it?
I have not seen anyone play it,
You've
and I don't have a set. There's a way to play it online. There's a digital version of it that you can get, or it might also be on Tabletop Simulator. But
Okay.
there's a good trilogy of books written by Steve Nichols
Okay.
that contain a number of moves and explanation of what every single piece and square means and how to interpret it. And
So
it's,
it has some actual examples of moves that then it
yeah,
expands on. All right.
it's really in depth. And if you don't know like 3 or 4 different oracle systems, like if you don't know tarot and astrology and the Egyptian gods, then it's not going to mean anything to you. It's just going to be impenetrable. But then really you should also know geomancy and enochian.
Oh wow.
So that's why no one plays it.
Well, it sounds. I mean, I can see a similarity actually with what I'm trying to do, though, in terms of it's the game is driving it, but then there's more to it than that. You think about it, and there's more depth that you can get out of thinking about the moves that you've played.
Yeah, it sort of there's also a random component because you're supposed to roll a die and then the number of the die tells you what kind of piece you're allowed to move.
Okay.
Yeah. So it sort of like generates a an occult text as you play where each move is like a single sentence.
Right. Okay. And the occult. What is what's meant to be the value? Is it the playing the game, or is it the text that's generated by the game?
Usually it's the text. My understanding is the
Right.
game itself is not very good. It's
All right.
okay. If you cared about the gameplay, you would probably just play chess or a chess variant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. It's been a while since
Yeah.
since somebody mentioned that to me. Yeah.
Actually, something I find more useful than Enochian chess is I designed a form of 8-dimensional chess. It's on like a 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 board.
Crikey. Well, I have to ask you if you've actually played that.
Yeah, I've played it a lot, both against myself and against others. It's way easier than it sounds. It's just a lot of squares, 1024 squares.
Ah, I see. Okay. So it's actually played on a number of chessboards.
Yeah, I have. You can get it print on demand if you want it. Almost no one has bought it except for me, and that's fine. And I have a. If you want to play it on Tabletop Simulator, you can play it for free, assuming you own Tabletop Simulator.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And the reason it's more useful, though, is that for divination purposes, would recommend is that each player adopt like an attitude or a way of thinking about things,
Mm,
and then they try to act out that way of understanding what's going on, because it's more complicated than you can calculate. So it's
mm.
more about your psychology as you're playing, and then you can contemplate each move in that way. What is the fact that I chose to focus on this area of the board, or defend more, or push more? What is that saying about the way of thinking and understanding that I've temporarily adopted?
Yeah, nice. I use my pack as well for not exactly divination, I wouldn't say, but I mean, because I use tarot actually, and I use tarot to sometimes, to give direction. And I thought at one point, I thought, well, I can use my pack in the same way, because it's the same with tarot, isn't it? The cards, as you use them, you get used to certain associations, and they come up in certain contexts, and you make your own associations over and above the ones that are kind of standard, if you like. And it's come to be that way with my variations pack as well. So once or twice I've actually tried to use that, and I've had an idea in my mind, a question in my mind, as you would say, but then had a theme and three contexts, and then thought about my question in terms of what I see on those cards. And it's yeah, it can also be fulfilling. Actually, it can be it can give interesting results.
Yeah, I think tarot is primarily a very valuable tool for contemplation. And that's actually what I mean by divination most of the time when I say it, is it's a way using various tools to prevent you from thinking about things in the way you normally think about them. There's
Mm,
usually an element of randomness so that hopefully maybe you can tap into more of your subconscious mind. And this allows you to better get at your intuitions and then contemplate them,
yeah.
as opposed to like predicting what's going to happen 10 days from now or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a good a good thought tool. Yes,
Absolutely. Do you have any inspiration sources beyond the wonderful list? I've been writing down all the names that you drop. I love it.
you've been writing them down. So, so somebody came to me. I think they wrote me an email or something, and just asked me very directly. They just said, "What is your?" I think they used the word gestalt actually, which I'm not sure really fits in this context. But they were basically saying, what do you come with? What kind of background do you come with to do what you do? And um, actually, when I was thinking about doing this interview with you, then I was starting to think through what has been influential actually on the way that I've been thinking about the game. And over time, of course, it's changed. So some things that have been influential in the past, and now, well, I was going to say now probably wouldn't be important, but it's probably because they're incorporated already, and I've used them, and I've built them in. But I would say Fluxus is one important influence. There was this guy. There was one of the. I think he was a video artist actually in the Fluxus movement. He was called Nam June Paik, and he was writing about how he was influenced by John Cage and Stockhausen, who he'd actually worked with. And he said, "Art is often a bastard, the parents of which we do not know." Which I think is a really nice way of thinking about your kind of influences and sources. But I mean, I really like thinking. I mean, you might not know who your kind of your influences are until you start looking. And I really enjoy looking for influences. So when I'm thinking about the glass bead game, I think the out of everything that I kind of like, and I enjoy reading and all this kind of thing, the things that I think have been really important in terms of the bead game and how I've developed it and how I play it tend to be involved with representation and meaning. Yeah, this is kind of the core I think that comes out. I mean, of course, Hesse is the top of the list. But aside from him acting as a kind of a North Star, that I move towards when I'm trying to develop the game, he's not that helpful in terms of the journey that you're making on the ground. He doesn't really give you much of a kind of detailed map to follow. So I don't know. It's been a bit of a winding journey, long and winding road. But I think the people that I've learned from, so poetry, the people that I've learned from in that area are people like Ezra Pound, J.H. Prynne. And I think that what I've taken from them are that it's the way they explore ideas. They take an idea in the same way that I try to, and they look at it through different contexts, just like one of the games that I would try and play. Linked verse is another source, if you like. I mean, you can bring it back to Basho, and this group of people that were around him at the time in Japan that were playing with linked verse, and they were playing together. They were creating these huge sequences of verse that were all linked by their ideas. So that's been, and also the techniques that they use. They tried to recontextualize ideas. They tried to defamiliarize ideas as well, I think, in the ways that I try to do. Linguistics. So Gentner and Lakoff, I think, are, famous linguists. I think what they've done in metaphor and analogy has been influential. This group, Saussure and Karchevsky, these were European linguists. Karchevsky is, I think, perhaps less well known. He's from the Prague circle of linguists, but they were writing about form and meaning and how they relate to each other. I mean, I even found when I was reading around this, there's these two whole kind of fields of, two whole academic fields called onomasiology and semasiology. Have you heard of these?
I have not.
So they're really interesting, actually, and they bring out what I was talking about before. So onomasiology is onomasiology. It is basically looking at different ways of expressing the same thing. It's an academic field that was founded, 100 or so years ago, and that's what it focuses on: different ways of expressing the same thing. And semasiology, similarly, or rather in contrast, should I say, looks at a particular sign and looks at all the different ways that you can interpret it. Yeah, so even it's not just individual authors, it's not just individual people. It's like there's a whole field that you can read around about this kind of thing. Art and art theory. So you mentioned about modern art and early modern art in particular. I think this has been influential for me. So for example, Duchamp, and the modern contemporaries. The question of representation, conceptual art and abstract art. The idea of the fountain. The Duchamp, the famous fountain, the urinal that he put into the gallery in New York. You know this one?
Yeah, that's a good one.
So that idea about that representing a fountain. Yeah, it kind of goes to the heart of also what I'm thinking about in terms of representation and meaning, form and meaning. And I mean, that's been a theme that's gone through all the way to putting a glass of water on a shelf and saying it's an oak tree. So that whole kind of linkage between form and meaning, has been influential. Oracles, yeah. So tarot, I Ching, astrology, and again, it's because of their take on interpretation as well. So looking at some signs that you've got in front of you, be it a configuration of stars, be it some hexagram, or be it some cards, and interpreting them in different ways, depending on the question that you're bringing to it. Yeah. obviously, when we're talking about interpretation as well, we've got psychology, Jung, Freud, dreams, all this kind of thing. Myth. So the classification of folk tales and thinking about what the folk tales mean. Yeah. So lots of different rich sources, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
That over many years, these have all kind of played their part in in helping me to think through what I'm trying to do with the game.
For sure. And I'm going to have to look into linked verse. That sounds
To
fruitful.
which one?
Linked verse?
Linked verse, yeah. So if people do this, I mean, there's like modern poets have tried this as well, and there's examples where people have done kind of collaborative poems. I think Octavio Paz did one. That he was working with some other poets, and basically it's about every poet kind of is writing their own part of it, of the overall work. I mean, if you go back to the way that they were doing it in Japan, it was quite a thing at the time. It was there was quite a scene that would be centered on people like Basho. And he would, people would come to him, or he would travel to them. But basically, they would set up this this group of people. They would invite different poets to come. It was quite structured. They had a kind of master of ceremonies, you might say, that was kind of in charge of the whole proceedings. They would start it off with one verse, and then everybody would have their go at writing the haiku then that would be the next in the sequence. And then they'd all hand it in to the master of ceremonies, and they'd pick what the actual next one was. There'd be a winner. They'd say, okay, this is the next one in the sequence. And then everybody would have to have a go at writing the next one again. And so it went. And, I think this used to go on with, some sake in the background and so on, and it used to apparently go on for quite a while. And they had some good poetry parties doing that kind of thing.
Sounds fun. Kind of reminds me of like a crowdsourced exquisite corpse.
Right. Okay. Yes. Except in exquisite corpse, you're not. You're. The whole point is you're not seeing what came before.
Yeah, you just see a little bit usually, so you can connect the lines.
You're talking about the visual version.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's a poetry version of that as well, actually, where you write and then you fold it and you pass it on. Yeah. But yeah, I see what you mean with exquisite corpse. Yeah. So you'd get the hint of what was going on previously, but in the Japanese link verse,
See the whole thing, right?
But there are a lot of rules about it as well. So you're not meant to kind of go back too far in the sequence. You're meant to relate to the one that came before. Yeah.
Okay.
And then there were certain rules about, for example, you're only meant to talk about the moon once every 7 verses or something like that, or there's a certain sequence of seasons that you have to follow. And so there was a lot going on around it as well, in terms of constraints, if you like, on the poets. And even within all those, when you read one of these sequences, they still come across as kind of quite dynamic, actually, because that was part of the point. It's not meant to be. It's not like Variations game, actually, because it's not meant to stay on the same theme. It's meant to link to what came before, but it's meant to be a very dynamic sequence that moves on to different ideas and so on. So no, it's really interesting. There's quite a lot around, I think, that you can read on linked verse now.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have any questions you'd like to ask or other topics you'd like to talk about?
I asked you about ritual, didn't I? That was the main thing that I wanted to explore with you, I think.
Exciting. I do have a ritualistic game that may interest you.
All right.
Are you familiar with tabletop role-playing games? Like Dungeons and Dragons?
So my daughter plays Dungeons and Dragons. She's a DM. Yeah,
It's cool.
I've played a bit. Yeah.
Okay. So I have this tabletop role playing game that it is inherently a ritual because when you make your character sheet isn't a bunch of numbers. You only have one stat that just represents how emotional you are at that point in time.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it's just a list of different occult symbols. They can be symbols from my system, or you could use tarot. Like imagine if you drew like 7 tarot cards and you stuck them on different parts of your character sheet, and that told you exactly how to act.
All right. Okay.
And then what it does is that you those tarot cards get changed in and out as you play. Like if you get injured, the tarot card on the bottom gets removed, and or you could flip it over or something. It's temporarily inaccessible. So the game
Okay.
is all about expressing different relationships of whatever occult symbols you're using as they change over time. And it does a similar kind of thing we were talking about with enochian chess, where it's like you move the piece and you contemplate the change of whatever the symbol was from one state to another, but in the context of acting.
Okay. You designed this, did you?
Yeah, it's called Flower Mist.
The Flower Mist. That sounds nice. It's a bit different from the kind of role playing games like Munchkin that I play and Gloomhaven and so on.
Yeah, it's
It,
not so much a dungeon crawler. You
yeah.
can do combat in it, but it's not. It's interesting because every time you get hit, you have to act differently.
All right. Okay. And it's using actual tarot, is it?
I play it using the symbol system I developed, where it's like flowers and mist and sidewalks and traffic lights. But the
Oh, right.
system
Okay.
is you can stick whatever symbols in that you want. You'd have to do some footwork if you wanted to use tarot cards,
Yeah.
but it'll work.
Yeah. That sounds interesting, actually. Yeah. And the ritual aspect of it, then.
Yes. Do you know what a hyper sigil is?
No.
So a hyper sigil is a sigil. Do you know what a sigil is?
Yes.
Okay. So hyper sigil is a sigil that exists across time. The most famous one is The Invisibles by Grant Morrison. It's a graphic novel. The protagonist is like a self insert character, and then a lot of the other characters are intentionally different aspects of the author's psyche.
Okay.
And then by writing out the actions of these characters, it is almost like uttering a ritual utterance, speaking a ritual utterance, such that it perhaps causes changes in your life. So if you
Okay.
play a game where all of the components or enough of the components are symbols that are meaningful to you, it becomes something like sympathetic magic, where you're manipulating them around only if they're meaningful enough to you that they impress themselves on your subconscious mind.
Mm.
So a glass bead game can kind of do that if the symbols and the themes you're talking about are all of deep enough importance to you. But if you play a game like Flower Mist, where all the symbols are inherently different magical symbols, as long as you've imprinted them on yourself by there are other techniques for that, like meditating on each symbol separately, that kind of thing. Then the game inherently creates a hyper sigil as you play it because you end up having these evolving relationships between magical symbols that change over time throughout whatever story it is you tell.
Mm. I like this idea as well about games not only being for the game's sake, and having something deeper, having an impact, uh, creating something as a result, changing life, as you've said as well. I think that's really powerful, and I think that my wish is, when people play my game, it's it gives them something more. It's like I talk about a way of seeing, a gift of believing for a little while. You know,
Yeah,
um,
whatever you play a glass bead game about, you'll have a different relationship for or
yeah.
with.
Emil Durkheim had this definition of religion, which was saying that it created a kind of moral, sensual universe that lifts the individual above themselves, and it gives you a different, exalted, more intense experience than your circumstances might otherwise allow. So this idea of looking at one thing and seeing another, having a reality beyond appearances, whether it's snow becoming blossom in the moonlight, a rock garden becoming a tiger and its cubs crossing a river. Yeah, that transformation is the what I hope people get as a takeaway. The ability to, or rather, not the ability, but encouraging that kind of thought, encouraging that kind of way of seeing things not only at face value.
Yeah, you can almost view any moment of your life as a piece of art.
That's Fluxus again. But
There it
yes,
is.
absolutely. That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it.
All right. Do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Yes, of course. So we've mentioned this Fluxus deck, which is one way of helping you to play this glass bead game. So the game that we played before was, we were picking contexts just as we saw fit, and we picked a theme that happened to be an apple. What the Fluxus variation card game does is it gives you some good themes, which are based on this Fluxus art movement, and it gives you some context as well. So it gives you, I think it's 36 context that you can shuffle, you can randomize, and it helps you to kind of have variety in the context that you're picking. So this is actually, I just got my barcodes printed this week actually. So I've got these packs. They're currently available in Europe in these art bookshops called Walter Koenig, and they're bookshops that are in galleries and so on typically. But I'm about to list on Amazon, so you hopefully, I mean, we're now in, what is it? It's August 2023. Hopefully by the end of this year, you can find these on Amazon.com. So that's definitely one thing that I wanted to plug. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, I write about the game. I write about. I give examples of my games as well. I've got a Twitter site which is called Justknecht, which is kind of a meta narrative, I think, about the games. But then I've got a site called Rattlesnake as well, which is on Twitter, and that's actually got games on there. So actual played games. Some of them I've done myself. Some of them I've played with other people, with my kids, with my friends, and so on. And some things that other people have played. So that's something that I'd welcome anybody that's interested to have a look at. And then on Medium as well. So I have, again, under the same handle of Justknecht, I have the Medium site where actually there's some print and play versions of the game on there. So they have the same contexts, but they have different groups of themes. So there's one that's on the theme of the art of war, which I did for a board game geek competition and won a prize for, actually. There's another one that's on Leonardo da Vinci theme as well, which I did for a competition on Leonardo da Vinci's, was it his 500th anniversary or something, which I didn't win a prize for. There's another one that's got themes from the alethiometer. If you know the Dark Materials, of Philip Pullman's book, has
Oh,
got this.
yeah.
Yeah, so I took the I took the themes from the alethiometer. So again, with the same contexts, and that's available as a print and play as well. So yeah, all of those things. And then there's another thing I've just put on Amazon, which is a write-up of some of my shorter games as well. So I captured the outputs of some of the games and did it's a bit of prose and then a haiku. You can see these on Rattlesnake Games, but there's a kind of an edited and an expanded version that I put out in a short book form as well, which you can find on Amazon.com as well.
What's the title of the book?
It's called 14 Short Glass Bead Games.
All right.
and it's under my nom de plume.
All right. Well, it has been good. I've been happy to have you on here today.
No, thanks, Ali. I've really enjoyed it.